9-time Pro Bowler and Super Bowl champion are only a few of the accolades that Russell Wilson has on his resume. And although he lacked in size, he more than made up for that in determination. With the Seahawks, Russell Wilson possessed great speed, playmaking, and the ability to go off script. But within the last few years or so, specifically his tenure with the Denver Broncos, the once Hall of Fame trajectory for Russell Wilson has now come into question by some people.
Is Russell Wilson playing himself out of the Hall of Fame? He separates from Pete Carroll. Geno Smith looks just like Russell Wilson when Russell Wilson was there, and they're having the same kind of success so far, and Russell Wilson looks lost.
And although year 2 was better than year 1 with the Broncos, Russell Wilson still had to find himself a new football home. And I will say this, it doesn't hurt that he is leaving with a $38 million payday from his former team, but that still makes us wonder, how good was prime Russell Wilson actually? Taking a look at his high school years, Russell Wilson was a baller from the day he was born. He familiarized himself with the game of football at the age of 4, being raised by Harrison Wilson III and Tammy Wilson. Russell Wilson's father played football and baseball at Dartmouth College and was a wide receiver for the San Diego Chargers preseason squad in 1980, before he eventually settled down to become a lawyer. So, Russell Wilson was blessed with athletic genetics and raised with the right mindset. Russell would go on to dominate at the high school level. He attended the collegiate school, a preparatory school in Richmond, Virginia. As a junior in 2005, he threw for 3,287 yards and 40 touchdowns. He rushed for 634 yards and 15 touchdowns. You could already see the type of player Russell Wilson was early on. He would continue this level of play into his senior year in 2006, throwing for 3,009 yards and 34 touchdowns. Wilson also rushed for 1,132 yards and 18 touchdowns. He would lead his high school to 3 consecutive Virginia State football titles from 2004 to 2006. He was the Richmond Times-Dispatch Player of the Year in both 2005 and 2006 for football, and he was recognized as first-team All-State for 3 consecutive years. And although he had a lot of success in high school, he was still only a 2-star recruit. Wilson would receive a football scholarship offer from Duke University, but he decided to commit to North Carolina State University on July 23, 2006. But it is an interesting side note that Wilson was selected out of high school by the Baltimore Orioles in the 41st round of the 2007 baseball draft. At that time, he was an athletic second baseman prospect out of Richmond, Virginia, and Wilson definitely considered it, but at that time he wanted to play 2 sports. Oddly enough, he would be selected again later on in college, but we will talk about that a little bit later. Russell Wilson would redshirt his freshman season. The following year, he would go on to compete for the starting job until week 5, but after that, Wilson led the team to a 4-3 record in the regular season, which NC State finished out on a 4-game winning streak, finishing the year with 1,955 yards and 17 touchdowns with just 1 interception. He also recorded 116 carries on 394 yards and 4 touchdowns. The ACC named him the first-team All-ACC quarterback. It was the first time in the conference history that a freshman quarterback was named to the first team. The next 2 seasons at NC State would also be followed up with more success. His sophomore year, he would throw for 3,027 yards and 31 touchdowns with 11 interceptions. He also added 260 yards on the ground with 4 touchdowns. And as soon as everything started to look great for Russell Wilson, tragedy would unfortunately come his way. On June 9, 2010, his father, Mr. Harrison Wilson, would pass away due to complications from diabetes at the age of 55, the day after Wilson was drafted by the Rockies. But what I did not know about this story was that Mr. Wilson had a stroke 3 years prior. During that time, the doctors only gave him a few hours left to live. Wilson was in college at this time, of course, so the only person by his side at that time was his wife. Miss Tammy. Russell Wilson would later write about this, and this is what he said. She was alone with him in the room that night, and she bent down on one knee and started singing her favorite song from church to him. It's called All by Grace. Russell Wilson wrote, after a few minutes, he started moving his hand a little bit. Mr. Harrison Wilson would live another 3 years before he passed away, and even with the emotions of losing his father hovering over him, he would go on to have another fantastic season, throwing 3,563 yards and 28 touchdown passes, adding 435 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns. The following year, Wilson graduated from NC State with a bachelor's in communications at that time. Russell made an announcement that he would be going to begin baseball training at the Colorado Rockies Association. He later expressed a desire to be drafted into the NFL. His head coach at the time, Tom O'Brien, and staff searched for scouts who would invite him to the 2011 Scout Combine, but no one was interested, so he was released from university scholarship in order to transfer to Wisconsin. At Wisconsin, he would lead his team to an 11-3 record with a big win against Michigan State in the Big Ten championship game. In that game, Wilson threw for 186 yards and 3 touchdowns. He would fall just shy of winning the Rose Bowls against Oregon. Wisconsin lost 38-45 with Wilson going for 296 yards and 2 touchdowns with just 1 interception. Wilson finished the season with 33 passing touchdowns, which set the single season record at Wisconsin and was the second most in Big Ten history, behind Drew Brees during his 1998 season at Purdue with 39. Wilson also set the single season FBS record for passing efficiency at 191.8. He graduated from Wisconsin with a master's degree in educational leadership and policy analysis before entering the NFL draft. Wilson was selected by the Seattle Seahawks in the 3rd round, where he would compete with Matt Flynn for the starting job. During the preseason, Wilson would go on to win the starting job and become the Week 1 starter, which was interesting because Flynn had just signed a $19.5 million contract that offseason, ending that year in 3rd behind RG3 and Andrew Luck in the Rookie of the Year race, throwing for 3,118 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. He also led the Seahawks to the postseason his rookie year, beating Washington in a comeback victory and coming just short of a field goal of beating the Atlanta Falcons. Russell Wilson will go on to have yet another 3,000-yard season with a total of 26 touchdowns in 2013. This will be the year the entire team will put everything together, led by the Legion of Boom. The Seahawks would end the season with a 13-3 record. They will beat the Saints 23-15 in the divisional round, and the 49ers in the NFC Championship 23-17. The Seahawks will go on to win the 2014 Super Bowl championship, defeating the Broncos 43-8. Wilson will become the first quarterback in the Super Bowl era to post a 100+ passer rating in each of his first 2 seasons. The following year would see much of the same success in the beginning, but the end result would be different. Russ would throw for 3,475 yards with 20 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He would rush for 849 yards and add 6 rushing touchdowns on top of that. They would beat the Carolina Panthers 31-17 in the divisional round and the Green Bay Packers 28-22 in an NFC Championship game in overtime. But then,
pass is intercepted,
and this would be what everyone would agree was the worst call in Super Bowl history. The Seahawks lost that game to the Patriots 28-24. The next year, Russ will go on to sign an $87.6 million contract extension, making him at that time the second highest paid player in the NFL. However, the season will not start the way Russell Wilson would have hoped. Through the first 9 games of the season, the Seahawks will only be 5-4. Russell will only have 10 touchdown passes to 7 interceptions, but Wilson would soon flip a switch and finish the season with his first 4,000-yard passing season, also finishing this season with the highest passer rating in the league. The Seahawks would finish with a 10-6 record, squeezing past the Minnesota Vikings in the wild card 10-9, but find themselves down by 31 against the Carolina Panthers before losing 31-24. In 2016, Wilson would see similar success, improving his passing numbers, having 4,219 passing yards on the season with 21 touchdowns, throwing only 5 interceptions through the first 12 games of the season, but then Wilson would see his worst day as a pro happen. Against the Green Bay Packers in a horrible 38-10 loss, Wilson would throw 5 interceptions in that game alone, matching his total for the season. But he would go on to finish the season with 11 total interceptions, but once again, the Seahawks would get bounced in the divisional round. Russ would throw for 215 yards on 17 of 30 attempts, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in a game against the Falcons. The Seahawks would take a step backwards the following year. Russell Wilson's numbers still look pretty good, going for 3,989 yards passing, 34 touchdowns with only 11 interceptions. This is the year he would also go off for 452 passing yards against the Houston Texans. He would also have 4 touchdowns and 1 interception in this shootout against Deshaun Watson, who also threw for 400 plus yards, 4 touchdowns, but he added 3 interceptions. That game, however, would be the main highlight of the season for the Seahawks, who finished with a record of 9-7, missed the playoffs, and this would be the first time Russ actually missed the playoffs. Fast forward in the offseason of 2018, the Seahawks would lose key players such as Richard Sherman to the 49ers, Michael Bennett to the Eagles, Cam Chancellor to a bad neck injury, essentially ending the Legion of Boom within Seattle. Russ would see another dip in his passing yards, going for 3,448 yards. However, he would have 35 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions. The Seahawks would end the season 10-6, but lose to the Dallas Cowboys 10-7 in the playoffs. Even with that being the case, Russ proved that he could be the main man in Seattle, at least in the regular season, which led to him getting a new contract worth $140 million the following season. Russ finished that 2019 season with 4,110 passing yards, 31 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, with 342 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. The Seahawks finished with an 11-5 record. Russ would go on to get his first playoff win since 2016 in a 17-9 win over Philly, a game in which he threw for 325 yards and 1 touchdown. The following week, he would come up short against the Green Bay Packers in a loss 28-23. Russ threw for 277 yards and also 1 touchdown. And there was still optimism around Russell Wilson's career at this time due to him playing so well after he received his big payday. So far, Russell Wilson has had a great career, but in my opinion, the 2020 season would be by far his best season individually of them all, especially in terms of just the regular season. He started out with a great win over the Atlanta Falcons. In a game, he threw for 322 yards and 4 touchdowns. The Seahawks won that game 38-35. The following week, he will follow that up with a 288-yard passing game with 5 touchdowns on top of that in a 35-30 win against the Patriots. So how did he follow up that next week? Well, he threw for another 5 touchdowns, 315 passing yards, and in a 3-game stretch, he only threw 1 interception. He finished the season throwing for 4,212 yards and a career high 40 touchdowns. He did throw 13 interceptions, but he added 513 yards rushing with 2 rushing touchdowns. However, the great regular season would not carry over into the playoffs for us. The Seahawks would lose 20-30 to the LA Rams in the playoffs. Russ only completed 11 out of 27 passes for 174 yards, and he also threw 1 pick six. For a season that was that great, a lot of people had way higher expectations for Russ in the playoffs this year, and things would not necessarily get better for Russ the following year, because in his final season with the Seattle Seahawks, in a Week 5 loss to the Rams, Wilson left the game with a broken finger. He would miss his first game of his career this season, ending a 149-game streak. After being placed on injury reserve, Russ will return this season and end with with 3,112 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. The Seahawks would end the season 7-10, which would be their first losing record in the Russell Wilson era. Throughout his time in Seattle, Russell Wilson would be a Super Bowl champion in 2014, a 9-time Pro Bowler, 9-time NFC Player of the Week, the most touchdown passes by a rookie at that time, first QB in NFL history to start his career with 9 winning seasons, most wins by a QB in his first 9 seasons, one of 3 quarterbacks with 250 passing yards in his first 9 seasons, the first quarterback to have 5 consecutive games with 3 TDs and no INTs. Russell Wilson was lighting the league on fire in his prime. He broke a lot of records with the Seahawks during his time there, but with a lot of greatness comes a lot of critics. Russell Wilson was sacked a total of 427 times in Seattle, and he said it was due to the fact that he held the ball way too long, either missing receivers or simply not throwing the ball away. So many question why Seattle would get rid of Russ when it seemed like he still had a lot left in the tank. Some saw it as a money move and believed that Seattle did not believe that Russ was worth another big time contract. Russell Wilson would be traded to the Broncos that offseason and sign a 5-year, $242 million deal. In that trade, Seattle would receive this, and the Broncos would receive this. Russ wanted a new start and more freedom in the offense, but the transition would not be what Russ or Broncos fans would hope for. Russ would throw for 3,524 yards, but had only 16 touchdowns, which was a career low, and 11 interceptions. The Broncos would finish 5-12, and with everything going from bad to worse, the Broncos would make a coaching change, bringing in Sean Payton to replace Nathaniel Hackett to hopefully right the ship. But the relationship between Sean Payton and Russell Wilson would not go as smooth as everyone had hoped. Even with Russell Wilson going on a 5-game winning streak during the season, he was benched in order to ensure that he would not get hurt. The season would end and Russell Wilson was set to be released later on. Fast forward, now Russell Wilson will be trying to resurge his once promising career in Pittsburgh, maybe with the same formula that won him a Super Bowl years ago. A great defense, a great running game, and a great coach. Will he be able to do it? Let me know down below. As always, do not forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. Also subscribe to the channel. I'm Hughes, and I'll see you guys on the next go round.